between you all and the cookies and great snacks outside. So I wanted to share our perspective, essentially over the last 14 years while at Caesars Entertainment, on tips, and particularly around the stakeholder engagement side. And the reason I share this is because it seems to be a very straightforward approach, stakeholder engagement around what nuances can we address, but based on a strategy that is foundational, and how do we embed our work into something that is core to the business is really what I want to share with you today. So first, I know that when people hear gaming, they think about straight up casinos and slot machines, but we also consider our business very much like the diversity of the businesses in here. For example, we have a number of retail stores, about 400 retail stores. We also see ourselves as a bank. We're regulated as a bank. We also have a real estate side of the business, places like the Forum Shops at Caesars or the Desert Passage at the Planet Hollywood, or Miracle Mile Shops, are all leased operations, as well as the direction that our business is heading in. So really want to look at it as a diversified approach as we relate to you all in the audience today as well. So I want to first set this in this framework. So any strategy that we've identified and learned, usually the first several years I get questioned a lot, and I still do, about how does this relate to our business? Why should I care? Should we turn off the fountains at Caesars Palace? Are we expected to take away the business experience of our customers at the Paris? So all of these questions are really answered to building a strategy within the core aspects of a company. And for us, the guiding principles are there in the blue. You see that's the code of commitment. It's our corporate ethos. It's who we are. It's how much of our strategies on our code of conduct, on our, in fact, our own internal audits are built on how we manage to the code. And then our programs that core from foundational work around responsible business to compliance to the volunteer aspects to the policy advocacy side all stem from this side of the business. And then, of course, like many of you have in the yellow, gone through materiality assessments for your organizations or your stakeholders. So materiality for us, and as we've observed other companies, you might start off with about 100 different priority areas, narrow it down to say 5, maybe 10. But then I think where the space seems to be going is not just reporting on measures and numbers and inputs, whether it be hours of volunteerism, but really looking at what are the performance metrics of outputs. So for us, this means of the $3 million you might give of dollars or 2 million bars of soap you might give to clean the world, to what extent is it actually saving lives? And to what extent is philanthropy being re-engineered to come out with a output that is essentially changing an issue in a local jurisdiction? So these are real key areas that we continue to work at. It's very, very challenging, but fun in different ways. So areas in yellow, as you see, there are 11 material areas from responsible business and conduct to rewarding careers, health and wellness for employees, to when you move over to the right, where it's in red, we think that identifying with global frameworks that's easy to understand, that's not just speaking in the echo chamber of sustainability advocates, that speaks and is translatable, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is a good guiding framework to which to follow. So what we've done, like many companies, the first year after 2015, you map to the goals based on your current strategies and your current activities, which we did. We ended up with about 7 of them that we were already working in. And then the hard part was getting 15 different departments internally to say, look, this is what we need to advance, the social and economic sustainability goals, narrow it down, do fewer things better, and simplify how we speak about our work globally, which is why you see all these colors in the corner there. It's called People, Planet, Play. It's basically a framework. It's not a strategy, but it was an answer to our global president who said, look, we're doing too many things. It's not really clear. What does it mean to the valet attendant or the bartender? What do we do around people? What do we do around the planet? And what do we do around our customers? So very simply and logically, we've Also translated it to our UK, Middle East, and Africa regions as well, which they immediately gravitated onto because it was so salient and simplified to the non-professionals. So those three there are on the right in red are the 3 SDGs that we map to, and from there we're shifting to more of the 2020 to 2050 related goals around sustainable cities and communities. Planet was very clear, greenhouse gases, climate, science-based targets around climate action, that was clearer. And the more difficult ones, of course, are around social, economic sustainability and how we translate that even internally to get stakeholder buy-in. So speaking about stakeholders, this is probably the latest iteration of our stakeholder wheel. When I share this to my procurement colleagues, they have an entirely different measure of success. For example, what you see there is working with activist groups. For us, on our side of the business, we welcome that engagement. We educate them about our work. We're authentic about where we fail and where we need improvement on. But for our procurement side, where we may boast about our work and say LGBTQ equality, that may cause some questions around what about the other types of diverse businesses, or what about the other types of procurements that we're not doing as well as in. So this is a really balanced approach that we deal with daily in the company. But also wanted to share that, I think 5 years ago when looking at the stakeholder wheel, you wouldn't have seen the investor activists, the investor groups, investor risk assessors, and the NGO activists as actively working together as they are today. This is just one informing the other on the environmental social governance side of the work, but also the way that ESG researchers are increasingly being much more sophisticated in what they ask companies to do. The questions from, say, Morgan Stanley or Dow Jones Sustainability Index are much deeper, more specific, and very sophisticated, more sophisticated than it has been in the past. We also look at, say, pre-competitive cooperation. So working with competitors, working with trade associations, and what can we do that goes beyond cost savings? What can we do that is shared knowledge? For example, in 2 weeks, I'll be heading into a international tourism partnership with the largest counterparts from Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, IHG, and others in hospitality are in this very small network called International Tourism Partnership. Surprised to see that many of them actually donate their ethical labor sourcing training materials or donate their learnings around human rights and human trafficking. So this is where the space is that we see ourselves moving into and others moving into, as well as encouraging the pre-competitive competition for collaboration. So on sharing this other slide, this is much more of a simplified approach to who in here writes sustainability reports or as part of one or as a customer around it. I mean, most of us, we all have this, right? Sustainability or corporate social responsibility reports. And oftentimes you hear, it's painstaking to me because I've overseen this for about 10 years, is right, who reads it, how is it utilized, and why are we doing it? Right, so, my aha moment was 3 weeks ago, our chief communication officer, it dawned on me that he continued to feel that our audience was entirely different from what I thought our audience was. So the need and the expectation to shorten the reports, to make it much more business friendly, to make it much more breathable for non-sustainability CSR types was continued to be a growing expectation. Now I see our reporting to appeal to 9 or 10 other stakeholders, from journalists, from media, from talent acquisition, to new development, partnerships, to those who will question the work or continue to question our work around these watchdog groups as well. But I share this slide because it's something that we've moved towards. We've literally cut our reporting in half. So we still report to these global frameworks, but our report is now about 60 pages. But we've also shifted to an approach of learning through the process, and beyond the report launch or beyond releasing materials, we utilize in social media, in third-party certifications, for ESG researchers. These pieces that live beyond that one point in time is what we're working towards, or continue to work towards, as well as 60 pages in one infographic, as you see right there on the slide. So this is all, who do we speak to and how we speak in the audience it's very different. I think another example of our stakeholder engagement is much of our work focuses heavily on policymakers, electeds, regulators as well, because in gaming entertainment, you're basically given one license to operate in that particular jurisdiction. So we have about 50 of those licenses, and each of those jurisdictions may have a regulator that operates differently from, say, Pennsylvania with Mississippi, with Missouri, all different priorities of interest. And usually in our line of business, you see more of a expectation on how is a new business going to provide more tax dollars, more infrastructure, more money for schools, more money for fire and safety and so on. So another piece of engagement and evolution for us has been these market summary sheets, market summary reports. So a few years ago, it might have been all about taxation, but today it includes things such as your social impacts, what we're doing to invest in capital and others. But I think the most interesting piece is how can companies benchmark themselves against others, right? Because the bigger company is, the numbers sound greater because there's more stuff to give and buy. But moving into this social monetization approach that we took on these reports, where we said, okay, of all the companies in the US that operate in Nevada, how do we compare in monetizing our social impact relative to the average company there for every $10 million in revenue? So the $10 million, that's normalizing. Combine the biggest impact areas, such as local, national taxations, wages, dollars, benefits, the value of volunteer hour, value of giving, etc. We put that together in this assessment. The benchmark is, relative to other US companies who operate in that region, what is the benchmark? It generally happens to be, and I believe other highly taxed organizations, about 2 or 3 times higher than the average US company in that particular region. So this is one way that we encourage our peers, our counterparts, to really look at how do you normalize and quantify, but also look at the outputs into that particular space. So I think one of the more under-leveraged assets of a company happens to be its people, right? Because a lot of times, corporate policy and strategy people like myself, we put together the strategy, send it out, talk to our stakeholders out there, but it doesn't get embedded into the organization. And particularly, it doesn't get embedded into these roles that tend to have higher turnover, or people who don't have access to company emails. For example, 60 or 70% of our own employees don't have a company email account. So what we've done is essentially prioritize our focus on these line-level employees, on non-management, because it's extremely important to keep the behavior changes with a carrot around environmental programs, to engage them, because we have a number of years of proof that in a service-oriented business, the service profit chain is extremely important to keep employees happy, to keep them engaged. In fact, to even keep them into this place of purpose in the workplace. So once you have a higher sense of purpose in the workplace, you tend to have a much higher sense of happiness and loyalty with the customers. There's a direct dollar correlation with customer loyalty and retention, as from the effects of that the employee engagement piece. So all of these programs that you see here have been around for 10, 20, 30 years at our company. They have to be refreshed every 2 or 3 years as a re-engagement program around responsible gaming. There's about 1,000 ambassadors out there, but they all have to be trained and they turn over. But what does the science bring into business around responsible conduct from, say, what was studied as compulsive behavior today versus 30 years ago? Different. So you have to refresh these programs and infuse it with outside knowledge and researchers, for example. The employee piece around affinity groups, we are trying to do much more crossover of diversity groups with say, general community involvement, because I don't see enough crossover in our space of other practitioners on the diversity side and inclusion with the employee volunteer piece as well. So this is an area I think we'll continue to work through. I think the more that we find embedding participation in these programs with actually variable compensation or success in annual measurement objectives, or even success in gaining promotions rates, should really tie into the level of engagement they have in core sustainability programs. So if I were speaking to, I had a feeling that everything disappeared there, but in the white boxes at the top, there are employee engagement is at the top. So if I were speaking to an executive or our board, I would use this slide with the boxes filled in. At the top of it, you tend to have employee engagement. So looking at studies, we see a 17 to 27% higher employee engagement scores if that employee participates in responsible conduct, diversity, Code Green, or HERO programs in the company. On the right there, the $50 million in annualized revenue, that is ROI, so operation efficiencies. This is the annual savings of our capital-driven programs for energy efficiency. This is pretty conservative. It's probably about 60 or so million. This is just based on investing from about 2003. We brought all these programs internally and had a corporate function to look at resource savings. Now the one on the bottom and the one on the opposite side are really basically saying, look, the attractiveness that a company has in the community can be tracked and can be affected by the way a company communicates to its guest. And we've seen this, if you're familiar with Net Promoter Scores, but this is like the golden rod standard for marketers and customer service types. So if a Net Promoter Score in an average company might be about 7% increase a year as a target, we find that by communicating our sustainability programs, you can hit that score and up to 3 times higher by just sharing with them in the right way what you're doing for sustainability on the social, economic, and environment. But it has to be done in the right way, really easy to digest, easy to understand. What are we doing around employee health or well-being? What are you doing around reducing the impact to the environment? But not sounding too preachy and not sounding too boastful will really impact that Net Promoter Score. And then, of course, on the bottom, in certain businesses, or many businesses, you want to be seen as acceptable partners in the community, right? So we see things on the news most recently of certain large employers who didn't have the right level of stakeholder engagement on the ground, so they're not accepted as building new operations in that community. So that happens to us all the time. We need to proactively build our social license to operate, being a gaming entity. So that social license to operate is essentially built on not just goodwill, but strategically and embedded. What does a social license to operate do to increase if we maybe test about 50 different things that we do around responsible business, but we communicate actively the top 4 or 5 different areas. And you see a considerable increase in jump on that license to operate. So I think one of the other areas, I know many of you are suppliers or suppliers to each other or service providers for suppliers, and when I say suppliers, it's also in the design and construction industry as well. We consider them suppliers. So our approach to sustainability and supplier diversity has really evolved since 2013. And it first starts with essentially your life cycle assessment and analysis there, which we narrow down into these commodities of concern. And the commodities were selected both on a impact of spend, reputational, but also real environmental and global risks. I mean, risks such as, are we going to have enough seafood in the next 10 years to actually feed the planet, or actually have life in the sea in 30, 40, 50 years from now? So it's real issues. So we've really prioritized how a company should approach this through working with strong standards, such as the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, World Resources Institute on the outcomes of carbon management and the effects on the climate, and this commodities of concern. I think the real opportunity in this is one area that we're spending much more time on, because the intersection of sustainability and, say, supplier diversity can be huge. It is big, but there's very few organizations that kind of float between the environmental side and then the piece that really enforces or impacts entrepreneurship, cost savings, and revenue generation, which we see as, if you help and work with entrepreneurs who happen to be diverse, veteran, women-owned, minority-owned, disabled, LGBT-owned, that there is a massive opportunity in growing the economy locally through entrepreneurship. And even within our company, I can share that 2013, we thought launching a much more rigorous supplier diversity program would cost much more money, and it didn't. It actually saved money. But actually, we found much more learnings in terms of innovations and new types of businesses, or the types of businesses that we could collaborate on, just from having a diverse supplier come to the table and to be doing more business with them. So these are areas, I think the sustainability piece with carbon and management, CDP, I think a lot of you are familiar with them. What we shared with them last week, we hosted their supply chain summit at the Flamingo. And I shared that I feel like being in the sustainability space, that we are often in our echo chambers, and we're using language that, I could go to a conference. I was in DC last week talking to our civil rights advocates, and just, we all talk about managing the business, growing capacity, but the language we use is so different. And I usually am at the same conference with different people in the same companies, the diversity types or the sustainability types, and oftentimes we're not even talking within our own organizations. So it's just, I think my takeaway this past year and being more active in multiple spaces has been to look at ways to intentionally drive outcomes through this intersectionality of diversity and supplier. So this is one example of a customer engagement side. So we often see as sustainability advocates, how do you show more revenue? How do we count things such as a marketer would count in terms of increase of activity, increase of spend, for us, increase of gaming play? This is a case in Southern California. The last 4 years, we've done much more work around customer behavior and sustainability. So here's a brief video.
We were inspired to create the Save the Bees program through our research when we were developing our Bees Knees promotion. We got in contact with a local beekeeper and found out how easy it was for us really to get involved in this. People, Planet, Play is important to our culture for really obvious reasons. Everything that we do revolves around those 3 things. Now we're here making an impact with our 5 local hives. The Save the Bees program means a lot to me because it shows what the team can do when they're motivated and given the right opportunities to do what they think is right. This isn't something that we had set out and planned to do. It's just something that occurred naturally, where the team saw an opportunity to make a difference and stepped up and made it happen. I highly recommend you reach out to a local beekeeper and just ask a question. Can we sponsor a beehive? Can we be a part of this? What can we do to help? This program has delivered on Caesar's commitment to environmental stewardship through actually physically making a difference in the local environment. We recently received our first real results from our local beehives. We harvested 12 gallons of honey from our 5 beehives. This is the best honey you can get anywhere. We just stepped up and did it, and personally I think that is a reflection of the team that we have and what we stand for.
So that's an example of how do we translate what could be perceived as a very narrow issue that appeals to a certain audience, but it really is a global issue around the bee colonies. And we changed it into a marketing promotion in Southern California. The marketing promotion thereby affected a series of outcomes, right? The revenue impacts and others. And this is a really interesting case because Southern California we actually operate the property for the Rincon Band tribe. We can suggest, but we don't own, so it's a lot of influencing and educating around how can we partner here. But this was, fast forward, we also did some things around this HuffPost AOL. It's around the sponsored content media. But I think the most interesting thing is that we, without investing any more money, without doing any more promotional dollars to draw people to the customer, to the property, we basically split their database in half. And half of the database receive, this is tens of thousands of customers, receive one additional email a month with a video, something like this, or something around EV charge stations, or something around their organic garden. But the customers who were in this additional email a month spent 1.5% increase more revenue with that property in a year period. And for a property of that size, it might be on the low end, 100,000, on the high end, million, I'm sorry. Low end, about $1 million, higher end, about $4.7 million. This is without any additional investment in marketing. When we look at the impact of that, and the impact of what it could do for multiple locations, for multiple entities, it's significant. So we actually are working on 6 different markets for something like that, but also doing more around embedding sustainability into general marketing promotions. In fact, last year, we had 4 times higher engagement around marketing promotions around this People, Planet, Play concept as well. A $80,000 investment in prizes around the country affected about $4.7 million in revenue. So pretty significant. You see the desire is there, but it has to be done in the right way, so it's not preachy or it's not too much about us. It's about the customers and so on. Lastly, I wanted to share with you, we have a few associates in here, I believe, Lauren Boitel of Impact NV and Dave Ray, who is on the board of Impact NV. This is an example around community-based stakeholder engagement. Now, 12 years ago, we were solely focused on the environment. So Green Chips was a name. It was an organization that the city of Las Vegas thought of. They came to organizations like us and our competitors, the utilities, nonprofits in the region, and focused very heavily around environmental sustainability on this being an umbrella organization for the region. Now, fast forward, probably about 4 years ago, we started looking at how do we expand on the social and economic aspects of this. So the name was updated to Impact NV, but also this organization is doing some really interesting things around being the first to have a social impact fund in a region, and particularly one that is focused around collective impact. So collective impact is, as you probably know, it's very much focused around policy, regulatory, investments, contracts, licensing, all of the above. It's the re-engineering of philanthropy that I spoke about earlier, but it's also taken on very key critical issues based on a material assessment. For us in the region, it's around homelessness, immigration, integration, and human trafficking. So if you see that on the right, on the other side of that, that's basically an ad in a local publication around the updated approach to something that's much broader and much more impactful in this growth, much more difficult, of course. So that's all that I have for you today. Hopefully you've taken a nugget or nutshell away on something that you could use in your workplace, and I'm happy to answer questions in the reception area afterwards. Thank you.